Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation on the impact of Chinese infrastructure development activities in Europe. In my talk I want to specifically focus on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, short BRI, which is a topic discussed not just among politicians and academics but has reached the front pages of newspapers in Europe, where it is often referred to as the New Silk Road. And in the picture that I'm showing here, this is the cover page of a report published by the World Bank in June 2019. And the title itself, Belt and Road Economics, somehow already suggests that this initiative is so big it can almost be regarded as a research field in economics in its own right. This map of the Mercator Institute of China Studies nicely illustrates that the BRI aims to expand and develop infrastructure in all directions, along different corridors and in different sectors. For the transport sector, some major existing railroad connections mentioned in the context of the BRI are drawn here in gray and black dotted lines. In light gray, you do also see some planned connections, including the one in Europe between Serbia and Hungary. Overland transport projects also concern the construction of roads and highways. In addition, transport infrastructure development also targets maritime infrastructure such as harbors, and one of them, the Greek harbor of Piraeus, has been a lot in the media in Europe. By plotting gas and oil pipelines in black and green, the map also indicates the importance of the energy sector for the BRI. And there is also a third branch, the digital one, concerning information and communication technology, which is not shown here. In my paper and the rest of the presentation, I will refer to these three sectors: transport, energy, and ICT, two so-called connectivity sectors. Chinese actions in infrastructure development and financing by now reach out globally, but still have a strong geographical focus on Eurasia and close to China. Within Europe, the BRI-related construction works mainly target economies with a strong need for catch-up in infrastructure investment, those of Central, East and Southeast Europe, which can also be regarded as the gateway to Western European markets. So which countries am I talking about? Since 2012, the Central Europe-China Summit is taking place on an annual basis. And until recently, the so-called 16+1 Forum comprised 11 European Union member states in Central and Eastern Europe, which comprise all countries that joined the European Union in 2004 or thereafter, except for the Mediterranean island states Malta and Cyprus. In addition, it covers 5 Western Balkan countries. In total there are 6, but Kosovo was excluded. And the +1 in the 16+1 refers to China. Last year, this forum was expanded to a 17+1 format when Greece officially joined in April 2019. And in the following, I will do some comparisons of data for the 17+1 with the Western neighbors in the European Union and the European Free Trade Association, shown here in dark and light blue, as well as with Eastern neighbors, shown here in gray. So now the 17+1 forum includes for the first time an old EU member state, as Greece already joined the European Union in 1981. So that's almost 40 years ago. Some people were surprised by the Greek step towards China, although it shouldn't have been too surprising given the heavy investments of China in the country. The most noteworthy are the investments by the China Ocean Shipping Company since 2009, which acquired a majority share of the biggest Greek harbor in Piraeus in 2016. It seems obvious that the next step should be improved overland transport connections from the harbor of Piraeus to different markets in Europe. The railway connection between Budapest in Hungary and Belgrade in Serbia is part of this plan. Unfortunately, however, Hungary did not adhere to EU public procurement rules, resulting in infringement proceedings in 2016. After a long process, finally also including a public tender in 2017, the project was awarded to a Hungarian-Chinese consortium. The dispute has been officially resolved, but the case has caused potentially also long-lasting damage to the confidence in Hungary and also in the Chinese investment initiative in Europe. Some countries in Europe, like Austria, also expressed their willingness to discuss with China the modernization of railroad connections starting in Piraeus along the Orient-East-Med Trans-European Transport Network corridor. That's the 10T. The current official Orient-East-Med corridor circumvents the Western Balkans, as you can see on the left map. However, a relatively new EU strategy towards the Western Balkans, adopted in February 2018, potentially in combination with Chinese initiatives, might soon change the region's connectivity with other regions as well as internally. The EU plans for freight transport railway connections, ports and railroad terminals are shown in the right map. In this paper or in the annex of the EU documents that are cited here, you also find additional maps on planned roads, passenger railways and airports. Within Europe, the regional focus on Central East and Southeast Europe can be appreciated as its infrastructure has been traditionally less developed than in Western Europe. The transition report published by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development estimates that infrastructure investment needs in some economies of the 17+1 group, such as the Czech Republic or Slovakia, Poland or Slovenia, were almost 3 to 4% of their annual GDP over the period 2018 to 2022. The need for infrastructure investment in the Western Balkans, as well as Bulgaria and the Baltics, exceeded 8% of their annual GDP. The need to extend and modernize infrastructure is greatest in the transport sector, shown here in blue bars, and the energy sectors depicted here in orange bars. Of course, now it would be interesting to see how the investment needs are met by Chinese investment activities. The data on Chinese activities presented in this report rely on the China Global Investment Tracker provided by the American Enterprise Institute and Heritage Foundation. The dataset distinguishes between investments and construction contracts. Over the period 2007 to 2018, a quarter of Chinese investments targeted Europe. As shown in the left figure, the EU16 in dark blue are the prime target in Europe, while the 17+1 still play only a minor role. The large investments in the EFTA region, the European Free Trade Association, in 2017 refers to a single takeover, namely of the Swiss seed and agrochemicals producer Syngenta. The evolution of construction projects shown in the diagram to the right show a very different geographical pattern. Eastern economies within and outside the EU appear significantly more important. Russia, of course, accounts for a large proportion of contracts recorded for the country group of Eastern neighbors, primarily in the energy sector, which is in line with expectations that China tries to improve and diversify its access to energy supplies. But Russia is also central to the BRI's success in the transport sector, with respect to northern Eurasian routes. To see some first indication of the difference in patterns, we split the data into the period prior and after the announcement of the BRI in 2013. And one can see that over time investments diversified more than construction projects, shifting the focus away from the energy sector towards other sectors such as finance, tourism, and entertainment. The big share for agriculture is again driven by the already mentioned investment in Switzerland. Without this single takeover, the share of the agricultural sector would only be 2%. Volumes of construction contracts were increasing as well, but less dynamically than investments, with connectivity sectors representing roughly 70% of the total both before and after the announcement of the BRI. If we now zoom into the 17+1 region, we do see that 92% of construction contracts worth about 12 billion US dollars were attributable to connectivity sectors. For the EU members outside the 17+1 framework, this share is lower at about 75%, and in the eastern neighborhood, the share of connectivity sectors in overall construction volumes is lower at 58%, owing to some sizable projects in Russia's steel and chemical industries, as well as in real estate projects in the region. So Chinese construction projects in Europe are concentrated in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, but this does not mean that the economic effects are expected only for these countries. The implementation of infrastructure projects triggers demand in the construction industry of the targeted country, and consequently the domestic construction industry may need inputs from other industries, stemming potentially from both domestic as well as foreign markets. And given that the European single market is characterized by widely spreading production networks, an increase in demand in one industry in one specific country can result in increased production, trade, and income in many other countries and industries. The linkage between industries of different countries can be analyzed with the integrated Europe Input-Output database provided by our institute, which comprises gross and value-added trade flows of 32 industries and 50 countries for the years 2005 to 2014. And to assess the potential effect of China-led infrastructure projects in Europe, we use the data on construction projects for the period from October 2013 to June 2019 and assume a business as usual scenario in which the construction industries of recipient countries source the inputs for the projects, as was the case in the past, because this information is what you do see in our input-output database. As such, the calculation does not assume that projects with Chinese involvement primarily use Chinese production networks for the implementation. The estimated GDP effects resulting from trade linkages across Europe triggered by these Chinese construction projects since October 2013 are shown in this map of Europe. It shows that the biggest effects as a proportion of GDP occur in the less wealthy countries in the Western Balkans. GDP effects greater than 2% of GDP are found for Montenegro, more than 10%, for Serbia, around 6%, Bosnia and Herzegovina, still exceeding 4%, and Northern Macedonia. more than 2%. The highest effects among EU member states within the 17+1 group are found for Slovenia, Croatia and Hungary. And for the remaining EU member states and the EFTA members, the effects are really small. What our calculations capture are short-term gains resulting from increased demand, direct and indirect imports via European production and supply chains. What they do not capture are some uncertainties and risks. While EU grants do not affect public debt, loans and credits from the EU, China and other countries do, and some small economies might find themselves caught in a debt trap. State-to-state negotiations might fuel corruption and highlights the need for transparent public tenders. Financial dependency might have a political impact as well, even if important creditors do not directly interfere. Recipient countries might act to please them. Our short-term estimates might prove also too high if projects are implemented with Chinese and not local contractors, suppliers, workers and materials. And finally, more stringent environmental policies for China's internal ecological transition might lead to the export of capacities in dirty industries, that is, to construct coal-fired power plants, for example. And for all these points, you can find some examples. On the other hand, our short-term calculations do not include potential positive medium-term effects. If the implementation of infrastructure projects leads to additional income in Eastern Europe, some of it will be saved and some of it will be spent again. And this part increases the impact on GDP. That's the macroeconomic multiplier effect. Furthermore, we should expect a reduction in transport costs and time, a modal shift towards rail transport, a diversification of traded goods and services, as well as companies involved in international trade and productivity gains in the medium to long term, and in the best case, the improved physical connectivity, in particular in the Western Balkans, with other regions as well as within, could help strengthening inter- and intra-regional cooperation. That already brings me to my conclusion and the policy implications outlined in my paper. Currently, of course, there's no other topic in economics other than the potential damage resulting from the spread of the coronavirus. Nonetheless, I think that the policy recommendations still hold once countries around the world, including China, have weathered the most difficult period of the current crisis. The continuation of the BRI will change physical and digital connectivity within Europe, and hopefully the European Union will become an active player engaging in the initiative in order to enable improved connectivity in Europe to drive economic convergence and not political divergence. Looking at the Western Balkans, the EU aims to increase the use of the Connecting Europe facility, which implies that the region will gain better access to EU grants. Currently, loans dominate EU financing in the Western Balkans and therefore also increase the region's indebtedness. Furthermore, the region should be better integrated into the Trans-European Network for Transport and into the European Energy Union. The InvestEU program planned for the EU budget for the period 2021 to 2027 is interesting for Eastern European economies within the European Union. And the idea is to use about 50 billion euros of guarantees that should generate investments in the order of 650 billion euros over a 7-year period through crowding in of private and public investment. At this point, however, I have to admit that I do not know how far the coronavirus pandemic is changing or will further distort these plans. Fostering cooperation within the EU-China connectivity platform set up in 2015 is a key action addressed in the EU strategy for connecting Europe and Asia. It was presented in 2018, and it should, I quote here, promote the digital economy, efficient transport connectivity, and smart, sustainable, safe, and secure mobility based on the extension of TEN-T networks, and promote a level playing field in investment. I'd argue that the need to establish a level playing field for trade, investment, and its financing with China has become even more urgent with the United States undermining multilateralism and adopting a non-cooperative stance towards the EU and an openly hostile position towards China. In my view, it would be necessary to restart trade negotiations, to successfully conclude the standalone investment agreement, to improve the coordination between EU members in order to avoid a rise of trade barriers within the single market in the competition for Chinese investments, to search for complementarity between Chinese and European initiatives to maximize the benefits for less developed economies in Eastern and Southeast Europe in the short and the long run. And last but not least, the monitoring of projects and the communication of negative and positive effects might increase trust and shape public perceptions as well as actions taken by investors and donors. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to a fruitful discussion.